Prateek, hi. Good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hi, Ashu. I'm very good. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, Prateek. Prateek, this is an important conversation, exciting at many levels, and this is a conversation that we've been trying to do for a very long time, right?
Right.
Given e-commerce has become just so much more exciting, last 1.5 years has actually brought in a certain, you know, it's kind of cultivated a habit, right? I think it's brought in a certain perpetuity to e-commerce, right? I mean, in a market like India, which operates at many levels, it's fragmented in so many ways, right? Everybody continued to question, right? How relevant would e-commerce go on to be, right? And there were new models which are coming up. But I think last 1.5 years is clearly established that going forward, e-commerce is going to be just so much more important, right? It's going to be a significant contributor to the overall retail sales that happens in India, right? The good part is we've seen a couple of very successful IPOs, right? Nykaa was phenomenal. Zomato again has been a great success. We've seen Paytm. Of course, it has its own journey, but again, the thought process was to create an ecosystem, which essentially meant a lot of e-commerce was there. And you're in the thick and thin of things, right? A late entrant, but
Yeah.
I think you're kind of carving out your own space and niche, right? Thus, this becomes an interesting conversation, an important conversation on so many levels, right? My sense is by the end of it, so many people who still have a desire to either create a D2C brand or creating platforms which can bring in more and more brands and so on and so forth. This is going to be a reference point for many of those people. So good to have you with us.
Hopefully. So there's a lot that happened in that dialogue. Because yeah, so you're absolutely right. E-commerce is phenomenal right now, and I'm more than happy to be here. I'm glad we're doing this. So hopefully, a lot of people could get some insights from this.
Super. Pratik, before we do that, right, and before we discuss more about Vanity Wagon and all the super work that you've been doing, right, and especially what has happened in the last 1.5 years, I'd love you to take us through your personal journey, right? What
Sure.
before you're doing Vanity Wagon, right? What were you doing? I'm sure that'll be a good starting point for, like I said, many people who are going to be watching this, right? One thing that I've gotten excited about, Pratik, is a lot of professionals who are now choosing to start up, right? The times couldn't have been better. And I think this
Yeah.
possibly is going to motivate some of them sitting on the fence, right? So tell me a little more about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so starting up is always, it's not the easiest of things, right? So you got to
Right.
leave the whole baggage of a 9 to 5, a consistent salary coming in your bank account. All of that goes away, and you suddenly come to a stage where you got to build something for yourself,
Right.
and which is definitely not the easiest. But I'll tell you about myself, and yeah, so I started off with a law degree, which is surprising because it doesn't relate to what I do today.
Right.
But so this was in 2011 is when I passed out my law. Back then, I thought one day I'll become a partner in a law firm. I'll be one of those associates who you see in the movies, right? So walking around wearing a suit and doing all of that. So
Right.
I joined a banking law firm in Bombay.
Uh-huh.
I got to wear suits for almost 3 years. I was in project finance, so did that piece of work, but realized it's too much, right? So law is a very tiresome industry. You got to
Right.
work endlessly, long hours. You got to travel quite a bit. So I just wasn't getting any time for myself, for my wife. So I got married early on.
Right.
2012 is when that happened. So I said, let me figure something wherein both of us can, one, work together, and
Right.
two, build something which we are proud of at the end of the day, and not just run like everybody else is running.
Right.
Uh, so that got me to Delhi. My father was then starting up an enterprise of his own. I came back.
Interesting.
It was in education, so I learned a bit
Right.
about business. I learned how would you actually start, how would you invest funds, how do you manage
Sure.
books. So all of that happened, and I
Hmm.
said, okay, let me do one thing. I'll go to the UK. I'll finish my MBA, which I have, of course, I didn't have a bachelor's or a master's in business. So I said,
Right.
let me do that, and then I'll be better equipped to start a business.
Right.
And yeah, so it's pen to paper. I went to Oxford, finished my MBA in 2017, came back and just hopped on to Vanity. And so initially I thought I'll do edtech. So to be honest, I
Interesting.
thought, yeah, I thought Byju's would pick up my company someday. But
Nice.
that's just how it is, right? So
Right.
Nana was very keen on beauty because she's been in the industry for a long time.
Right.
And when we actually sat down and started discussing the prospects of a business, we said, okay, so beauty looks good and clean
Right.
beauty all the more because back then there was no clean beauty market. It was just
Right.
Nika, Nika, Nika.
Right.
So yeah, so that's how we started off, and here we are.
Interesting. Pratik, that's a lot of information, right? And I think it's a very interesting pieces to that entire scheme of things, right? I'm going to jump into my uh, my first question, right? Which is more about you've with Vanity Wagon, you've carved it out in a slightly different way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I've been in the venture capital ecosystem. I've been in the startup ecosystem for about 8-9 years now, right? And trust you me, every deal that we saw 2013 and onwards, anybody who was trying to do e-commerce, right? I think you would typically just brush it off, saying that listen, there's leadership which is getting established, right? It's just so much more difficult, right? For the other player, it's just a small feature integration or an additional supply chain effort, which just essentially means about a few people, and they can possibly eat into the market share of many players. I stand corrected, right? We are possibly underestimating the power of consumption that India could offer, right? But even then, right, this has been a very difficult market, right? Tell me a little more about the construct and your journey having to create Vanity Wagon. And I'm sure it's not as easy, right? It's been a lot of effort. It's been a lot of possibly deliberation, disconnects at many levels, right? Tell me a little more about that, right? The early days, some of the key decisions that you've taken in the process, right? And the construct of Vanity Wagon as it stands today.
Sure. So one thing very interesting that you said, so e-commerce back in, if you can go back to 2012, 2013,
Sure.
everybody had a feeling that you needed a one shop for everything, right? And
Right.
then came a whole era wherein you started having companies carve out niche markets.
Sure.
You can get a good example of First Cry doing that with baby
Mhm.
ranges, with all the
Sure.
with all the children products, and then you've got somebody like a Pepper Fry coming up and saying, okay, hey, I'm only
Mhm.
going to sell furniture,
Right.
and so on and so forth. Today you've got
Sure.
these food meat companies selling Licious. You've got
Right.
a lot of these companies just doing meats. So
Mhm.
so that's the whole journey of e-commerce, right? So it's at some point customers want personalization, and
Mhm.
when I say that, as a consumer today, let's say I want to buy a product, it just can't be I go on a website and I buy absolutely everything from that website because there
Sure.
is just no personalization. Let's say when I shop fashion from Mintra, I shop my food from Big Basket. So I've got this whole array of companies who are assisting me in that journey,
Right.
and that's where Vanity Wagon came in. So what
Mhm.
Nana and me were doing is, so initially when we were in the UK, I'll give you a backdrop of the early days.
Sure.
So we were in the UK, we saw these clean beauty markets would essentially doing some phenomenal business out there, and we said,
Mhm.
why does this not exist in India?
Right.
And we came back, we saw these amazing brands, right? So Mama Earth was kicking off, Arata was
Mhm.
coming up, Juicy Chemistry was almost 2 years old then. So we said,
Right.
okay, so there are these great brands,
Mhm.
but Nana herself wasn't aware of them because Nika
Right.
was very focused on mainstream commercial brands, right? So
Sure.
brands like Mac, Huda Beauty, all these guys. So we said,
Right.
if that opportunity exists for Nana, why does it not exist for everybody else?
Sure.
And that's the reason we started off. Initially, of course, it's a lot of hard work, right? And
Right.
it's a lot of how do I put it? So you've got some things right, you've got some things wrong. It's a mix
Right.
of all of that.
Mhm.
When we started off, we initially thought we'll do a road show, like a city to city market. That's why the name Vanity Wagon.
Right.
And we thought we're going to do that in every city and then let people access beauty that like that.
Right.
But we realized that's just too old school, right? So you've got a
Mhm.
digital scheme of things. You've got
Right.
an entire framework of online companies who can help you trade online, and that's where we
Sure.
started. Okay, let's not do that. Let's build a
Mhm.
marketplace. So that's the
Right.
first big decision we took, is by launching online. I'm glad we did it
Mhm.
because 2 years after that, it's been a nightmare for offline companies.
Right.
So that happened. Then we initially, the biggest challenge was brands. What brands would come to us? We started talking to a lot of them. A lot of them didn't have trust initially. They said, "Okay, we
Sure.
don't even know you guys. You guys have no background in e-commerce, or
Right.
for that matter, in entrepreneurship. So why
Sure.
should we even on board?" So
Right.
so we had like 10 brands who finally agreed to do this with us.
Right.
And so this is September 2018 when we went live. And I
Mhm.
remember the first day we went live, within half an hour the website came down, because
Wow.
our we didn't factor in an angle of, let's say, 1,000 visitors coming in. So
Right.
back then, 1,000 used to look like a number, and we said,
Right.
okay, what it'll be just family, friends, like 20, 30 people, and suddenly I see my AWS bills going up. I have to
Right.
increase the size of the machine, all of that. So we started from there. Uh,
Right.
a lot of plugins did not exist. A lot of offers, the way you broadcast products, cataloging. Slowly, over the period of 3 years, we've migrated to a level wherein we've got a person handling every aspect of this business, which is where we are today.
Wow, that's overwhelming at many levels, right? And I'm sure not a lot of people who are going to be listening to this can really understand the intensity with which you have to deal with some certain complexities, right? The ones you're highlighting, right? Pratik, what's the construct of Vanity Wagon today, right? So, what I want to understand is the kind of brands that you're, for example, focusing on, right? Are you largely focusing on D2C brands? Are you focusing on slightly niche brands, new brands, empowering entrepreneurs, or are you like a Nika or anybody else for that matter, right? Which is in that category where beauty is a critical and a key segment, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Onboarding established brands as well on Vanity Wagon.
Right. So we've created a mix, and the reason is that so we're not going all entirely the Nika or the Amazon. Amazon is
Mhm.
still different, but entirely the Nika way, right? So we're not going that way. We're not saying that okay, a new brand can't come in because one, you don't have a brand value, you don't have sales,
Right.
all of that. So we are fairly lenient when it comes to that filtration.
Right.
Our filtration is more on the lines of the product should be clean, the brand should have an ethos of sustainability. Uh, it could be in the form of the packaging they use, it could be in the form of recycling they do. So all
Sure.
that needs to fall in place. And
Hmm.
even if the brand is, let's say, a month old, but it's doing all of that and it's willing to work with us, we are more than happy to get that guy on us. And so that's one category, right? But parallelly, I need to run a business. I understand there is a market out there. I need to keep
Right.
growing.
Sure.
To meet those continuous demands of the market, we also onboard large brands. So we've got Mama Earth, we've got Momsco, we recently got on Wow, we've got M Caffeine. So all these are big guys out there, right? So
Right.
we've got these guys, so they help us achieve a certain market.
Sure.
Parallelly, we are building a lot of brands. Now, one question that I think could come up from this for most people listening to this right now is this
Sure.
is easy, right? Just pick up four top brands and you got a marketplace right there.
Right.
But it just doesn't happen. So I thought
Right.
when we onboarded Mama Earth initially in the, I think the third month of our journey, we thought, okay, so this is it, right? So Mama Earth is coming to us. Suddenly we're going to
Right.
get 2 crores of sales, and the rest is going to be over.
Right.
And it's been 3 years since then,
Mhm.
and Mama Earth has not been the highest performing brand for her ever. So for us, the highest performing brands have been Juicy Chemistry, Tribe Concepts, Shesha Ayurveda, and a lot of these brands who most people wouldn't even have heard of.
Right.
And that's exactly what it takes to build a business, right? So you can't just stand up tomorrow and say, I'm going to imitate Amazon and just sell books and become the largest marketplace in the world. So
Hmm.
it takes a little more than that. And I think because we are true to our whole ethos, hence customers have continuously related with us.
Interesting. Pratik, I want to ask you a customer question, right? Now, I think our assumption was, and essentially, I think anybody who's in a decision-making capacity today is a key buyer, right? Was essentially has experienced Amazon, right?
Yeah,
And I think in a certain form and way, there is a certain, you know, uh, uh, you know, the benchmarking for any business, right, in the e-commerce space essentially happens with that of Amazon, right? And it's been absolutely splendid, right? I think that's possibly the reason it's at a position where it is at, right? What are some of those? So what when you say that the customer is looking for something, say bespoke, if not bespoke, but say specialized information, right? Uh,
sure.
how is the customer's mindset changed, right? Is it because we're seeing more disposable capital? Are we've because of say the education sort of say landscape improving, increasing. There's a certain shift, right? People have now become more aware in terms of what they require, and that's possibly what's created space for newer
Yeah,
niche players like yourself, right? What's
yeah,
happened to the consumer landscape? Where does that shift come from? Especially in the last, I'd say, 17 onwards, right?
yeah,
Is what I want to really understand, and I think that's possibly true for a lot of D2C brands as well, right? Because when I look at India, the biggest of all challenges that I think anybody's tried to sort of solve for India is the trust deficit that exists, right?
sure.
What has changed in the last, say, ever since you started to deal with it, right? What
Yeah.
on the consumer side have you experienced to change, which is helping you, say, communicate better, engage better, convert better? I'd love to understand
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So one, you're absolutely right. Amazon is a super benchmark, right? And I think everybody who does e-commerce in India pivots around what Amazon is doing.
Sure.
But the problem that we've understood since in our journey is that okay, so Amazon is a big player out there. They've
Right.
got the funds to do absolutely everything, including drone delivery, probably in a month or 2 months. I don't know when they're going to start that. I've been looking outside my window, but I haven't seen a drone.
Right.
So, so they have the capacity to do all of that, right? But then, uh, why is the consumer suddenly shifting away and saying, okay, no, I want to buy clean, or
Right.
why is that shift happening? So essentially, if you look at the journey of e-commerce, so
Hmm.
let's forget e-commerce. Let's look at the journey of
Hmm.
commerce. Even when beauty brands like Lux were started back in the days, or you had Dove starting it with its first advertisements, the idea is to create a habit, right? And to
Hmm.
get yourself in a place where consumers feel, oh, I need to do this,
Hmm.
and that's what happened. So the whole content landscape has shifted so drastically towards ethical consumption, right? From you, so let's say I open my phone today, I would see an
Hmm.
article about, let's say, Africa, where kids are not being fed well, and
Sure.
suddenly I start, oh, I need to do something for that society. So that
Right.
societal feeling has kicked in, right? And you've got climate change being real. And when all this is happening, so the biggest chapter for me in Oxford was climate change, because 2016, 2017 was the time when this was like heavy in discussion. And uh, and so so this happened, and then suddenly
Right.
consumers today read so much about it, their
Sure.
subconscious mind starts telling them that I need to do the right thing.
Right.
And the right thing would then be little sustainable,
Sure.
waste less, consume what you really need to consume,
Hmm.
don't just fill your shelves. And then comes buy products, eat products that are good for your skin, hair, and they don't harm you or the environment.
Right.
And that's why you see a lot of these greenwashing, a lot of these concepts have come up, right? So, and they've come up because of that very reason. But I'm not saying the consumers are going to suddenly stop buying everything
Right.
else and only clean now. That's not going to happen. But
Sure.
it takes time for an industry to evolve. But yeah, 17 to now, it's been an upward curve, and I hopefully it stays that way.
Interesting. Pratik, that's a very interesting point that you've highlighted. Right now, when I hear what you say, right, um, I think India has been a price sensitive market ever since, right? And I think it'll continue to be that, irrespective of whatever financing that we start to do. I think we'll always be people who will look for a greater value, right?
Yeah,
Now, I mean, I understand where you're coming from. Where you're trying to sort of bring in that sensibility, which is around, say, uh, you know, a product being clean, for example, right? Sourcing and so many other things, right? It being ethical at many levels, right? In terms of what it's doing, what it's not doing, right? How difficult is it to maintain a path, right? Because you're choosing for a certain niche, right? You're choosing for
yeah,
a certain target audience, right? That's not mass market. When you talk of anything India, you're essentially talking of mass market, right? The easier thing for you is to identify, or negotiate a better value, pass it on, becomes a good game, right? How difficult is it for you as a founder to maintain that balance? Given that you've raised a couple of rounds, right? You have investor expectations as well, right?
yeah.
How difficult is that path to maintain, sustain, right? Be morally correct when you're approaching this problem, right? Because there have been many other brands that have come up, right? That were built on the back of, say, a yoga, that were built on the back of, say, wellness, right? Eventually, their entire sourcing is now being questioned, right? Because there's no difference from what a brand A, B, C, D offered, right? And then the newer
Absolutely.
brands are kind of offering, right? There's a huge distinction. So, I mean, what I want to understand is that how are you kind of balancing your compass, right, or moral compass, if I can put it that way, right, by not getting or not succumbing to that pressure, right, of acquiring more and more customers, right? Because the audience that you're targeting are much smaller in number. How are you doing that?
Right. So one thing that's definitely out there in relation to this is
Sure.
brands tend to pivot in different ways, right? So I'll
Uh-huh.
I'll give you a quick example here. So you've got a brand like, let's say, Mama Earth, pivoting more towards mass consumption, and
Sure.
then comes the angle of even accidental consumption, right? So
Right.
uh, so not necessarily everybody who consumes Mama Earth knows that it's clean, knows that it's ethical or whatever, and then so consumption also comes from, hey, I love the smell of that product, or that product is inexpensive. It's the same price as another brand, but yet I can consume it because it's new and it's good looking. So
Sure.
there is a lot of accidental consumption, which also eats into the whole beauty market. So let's
Mhm.
assume there is a big set of beauty,
Sure.
and there is a small subset of clean beauty, as they call it.
Mhm.
Now, one, this was happening. Two, suddenly when you have all this information going out there, so
Mhm.
especially in tier one and tier two, of course, tier three is a different ball game altogether. But tier one and tier two, you've got this information, plus you've got accidental consumption. Now, what happens is your market starts growing. So, a very quick number here is that I remember back in the day, so about a year and a half back, I used to do a lot of research. I still do it for understanding the total addressable market.
Sure.
And it used to be, so they came up with a statistical calculation that it's about
Right.
$12 billion by 2027.
Sure.
Suddenly they changed it in the last 2 months, and now it looks like a $22 billion by 2027. So
Right.
so I'm not sure who's the guy sitting behind that Excel sheet, but somebody's
Right.
come up with that number, and they feel that that number is fairly accurate. So when that happens, you realize, okay, so the market is growing.
Right.
Now that's one. Now second, validation. So
Sure.
what also I understand I need to answer is about how would I keep meeting investor expectations and grow. So
Right.
the second validation for us is that a lot of these big companies, even you even hear L'Oreal getting into clean beauty today.
Sure.
And when that happens, suddenly my market increases, right? So because I
Mhm.
can now get L'Oreal on my platform.
Right.
So that's the beauty of this. Once the industry starts picking up, a very simple example is we are onboarding almost 12 brands a month.
Mhm.
Uh, and with that pace, we've grown from, so last investment 3 months back, we had 130, today we have 165. So
Interesting.
it's a phenomenal space of growth. And when that happens, automatically consumers come in. And marketplaces usually benefit a lot more than I feel than a brand centric business because we've got the whole array of products, right? So you could buy even makeup from me, you could buy skincare, hair care, teas. So we also
Sure.
have wellness in our website, which brands, of course, don't have the luxury of doing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Prateek, you know, of course, I have many, many questions, right? But I think I'll try and sort of sequentially align them to what you put out. What I want to understand is, of course, your brand onboarding process, right? And what are some of the things that you would possibly look at, right? Because of what you've said, I mean, I understand it's a difficult job, right? You have to continue to balance your numbers, you have to continue to communicate better, so on and so forth, right? But what I would love to understand is, what is your onboarding process like? Second, which is a subset of the question, do you have some sort of an exclusivity with these brands, with say certain subsets of the brands, exclusive lines that they're offering? What's the relationship that you have, with the players listed on your platform?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked this. So I don't want this to sound like a vanity wagon rant, so I'll rather make it more generic.
Sure.
So one, onboarding process, of course, is specific to us. How we onboard is fairly straightforward in the whole process. We check the brand for all the ingredients. So we don't do a clinical test because, of course, that's fairly uneconomical for us to do.
Sure. Sure.
If I go and test 4,000 products, it's going to be a huge cost.
Right.
So we have rather a more of a self-use testing within the team. We've got almost about 12 women who work with Vanity today, and
Sure.
so that Nena being one of them, and her team would go out, try the products, make just see if it actually does what it says it does, and
Right.
then we at least know that the brand is fairly stable in
Interesting.
its intelligence. Uh,
Right.
Besides this, we look at the brand value, what kind of information the brand is giving out, and after while all that is happening, we see the certifications they've got. So
Sure.
it's absolutely phenomenal if you have an eco cert, but eco cert is fairly difficult to get. So
Hmm.
so then there are other certifications that you could hold. We see all of those, and once all that is in place, we finally decide, okay, this brand is good to go, and
Sure.
that's how we would onboard the brand. Now, when I said in the beginning, I want to make this generic, is so brand onboarding. After that, what happens is the process becomes slightly different for every market, right? So uh, we have this way of doing it. Some others would have it in a different way,
Sure.
but yeah. So to any entrepreneur who's out there, my suggestion is that don't run after a particular brand. So I'm specific to e-commerce markets. Don't run after a brand. Don't run after a product. Rather, what you mentioned, work on those relationships. We've built a very good relationship with our brands because we transact directly with them. So there is no
Right.
middleman. We don't
Right.
have a longish supply chain.
Right.
And because of this, we've got almost 4 exclusive brands. We are
Mhm.
closing a few more deals in the next 2 months. Uh, Besides this, we also do product launches, what you also mentioned. So we've got those
Sure.
exclusive products that keep coming out in every 1, 2, 3, 4 months, and we have
Mhm.
them exclusive for a period, and then we could bring them out to the whole market. Uh,
Interesting.
but yeah, to establish that, you need to start from the level where you start talking to these brands personally.
Right.
And Nana and me are just at it. I've got almost all the brand owners' numbers.
Interesting. Interesting. Prateek, a subset of that question, right? And I think it's an important piece to be talked of and addressed, right? Now, when you are into a game like the one you are, right? And when we're talking about the India landscape, which is extremely price competitive, right? I mean, I am not a very savvy shopper, but there are many, many savvy shoppers, right? Who will have, 5, 6, 7 apps, right? You have, larger, search engines started to now support you in your shopping experience, all of that, right? They give you the best prices, right? What are you doing to manage that? I mean, I understand exclusivity is something, which is one wall of defense, right? That you can create. What's your second wall of defense, right? Is there a financial model that you've built where you are in a way there are certain say MGs that you have, yeah, superior commissions that you have, which are there. Are you able to negotiate that? What's the business side construct of the relationship with these brands?
Right. So this connects back to what I said a couple of minutes back. So because
Sure.
we are so close to these brands, we work very transparently with them. So we've got a fairly healthy margin, going almost up to 35% in certain cases. And
Right.
besides these, we actually talk to brands and say, okay, hey, Diwali is coming up. We should do an offer together. And we come up with a number where we both are comfortable and we put that out there for customers. Now, the advantage with these guys is that these brand, because we're talking straight to the owners, we usually do not get undercut, right? So the brand would not then go to Amazon or another marketplace and say, okay, you guys can take an extra 5% discount.
Right.
So even if that happens, then our system is foolproof in terms of the value we've built. So we've got a
Sure.
loyalty engine. We've got a personalized service in terms of our customer care. So I've
Sure.
I've never received a call from a large market. You can name either of them, saying
Mhm.
that hey, you bought a product. Thank you so much. We love to have you a part of the family.
Sure.
Things like these go a long way, right? And
Mhm.
that's why these new gen marketplaces or entrepreneurship or e-retail companies are doing. So you've got a
Right.
lot of examples out there. You've got Bewakoof doing a phenomenal job, and
Right.
so that's more about that one, that personal connect, and that continues building that trust for the customer. So yeah,
Interesting.
I hope that answers your
It
question.
it does, right? I mean, of course, Bewakoof was a great parallel that you brought up, right? So say daily objects, Bewakoof, Chumbak, right? I think the difference is when you start looking at those models, right? I think you're factoring in an element of creativity, right? Which is very unique to them. I think when you're talking of, say, for example, a category like yourself, right? The one you're in, that's a very, very difficult category, right? Because the seriousness is very different. I mean, a t-shirt doesn't. I mean, I've bought a t-shirt, I don't like it. I can kind of dish it out, right? But you know, I don't want to experiment with something that could possibly I could have, say, an acne, I could have
Yeah,
a pimple, so on and so forth, right? So those are,
yeah,
I mean, the challenges are very different, right? But I think we're going to save some of that, Prateek, for our next conversation, right? Prateek, what I would love to understand is what are the demographics like, right? What is of your buyer group, right? What are the key demographics? I mean, I'm sure you must have bundled up. Would love to understand that, right? Where are your maximum orders coming from? Who's your average, or say, the thickest segment in the buying funnel, right? Would
yeah.
love to understand.
Sure. So, surprise. So this was a surprise to me, right? So we are a company based out of the north, and so we thought initially when we started that okay, hey, North India is going to be a strong ground, and we're going to kill it
Sure.
here. But
Right.
it just so happens our audience has built in the south, and uh, and the reason, of course, is the larger reach of information. So knowledge sharing is fairly advanced, a little more advanced, I would say, towards a lot of states down south,
Right.
and so that's the reason you have a lot of consumption happening there for the products that we have to offer. Plus,
Right.
a good part of brands who are producing clean beauty today come in from down south. So
Mhm.
that's why that market is very how do I put it? It's very clouded in that sense
Right.
towards the southern region. So that answers that piece of question. So our biggest audience comes from down south, and
Uh-huh.
uh, yeah, so that's
Which
the
are the age groups? Which are the age groups which are doing well for you? Which are what's your
sure,
AOVs, for example, broadly? I
yeah,
mean, I understand these are questions that are not available in public forums, right? But broadly, what are these things? But because,
yeah,
and I ask you this question, I'll give you a background to this, right? I mean, I ask you these questions largely because for a generic beauty play, right?
yeah,
The AOVs are going to be different, right? But for something which is, say, slightly more sensible, where people are cautious, they're willing to pay a higher dollar, right?
yeah,
And when you're doing ethical and when you're doing clean, right, your cost of production typically tends to go up, right? Because a lot of
yeah,
these materials in the back end are not necessarily available in plenty, right? Economies
yeah.
of scale becomes a little difficult, right? So what are those statistics like? What are those numbers like?
Yeah. So on the demographic front, right? So consumption of beauty now is different from what it used to be. Now, because women being so independent out there, right from an early age, right? That's how our society is shaping up. So our consumption happens right from a 19-year-old teenager going all the way up to a 54-year-old person,
Sure,
and so that's the whole array. But of course, you've got a category, a certain category that works better for a 40 plus, let's say an
sure,
anti-aging, or you've got a
right.
category that works very good for a teenager,
Hmm.
something like a very quirky colored lipstick. So things like those are, of course, they vary over the whole spectrum.
Right.
uh, that's one. And then in terms of maximum consumption, because clean beauty is still new,
Hmm.
you don't have a product for everyone just yet. You've got a
Right.
lot of products out there, but
Hmm.
there's not always going to be the case that you're going to have one for everybody. And
Hmm.
that's the reason maximum consumption still happens with women, right? So men are yet to come onto that bandwagon of being ethically conscious and say, okay, I am going to consciously consume something. So I'm personally saying this out of my experience as well.
Sure.
uh, a lot of times you would consume a unisex product, or you would go in for a product that just feels and touches nice, rather
Right.
than actually thinking about the background. So hence, women of course command the highest share of this market,
Sure.
uh, and we are penetrating fairly heavily in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. So
Interesting.
that's how it is. Could you repeat the last part of your question? I just missed that piece.
No, I think this kind of answers it all, right? So I mean, I
Super.
understand. I wanted to understand more about AOVs and stuff, right? But
Yeah.
I think you kind of in a way touched upon this, unless you want to specifically answer.
Yeah, so I had a quick answer on that. So uh, what we decided is that we're not going to build a market that's only for a luxury audience, which
Sure.
is a which is a good assumption of a clean beauty marketplace being like.
Hmm.
Hence, our average orders value would be fairly in the let's say a 10% above the regular e-commerce average order values.
Interesting.
So we would see it anywhere in the tune of 1,000 to 1,500, and the reason for
Hmm.
that is we've got everything for every economic section of the society. So
Okay.
we've got a product that's a 200 rupee cream to all the way going up to a 10,000 rupee for a serum. So we've got
Hmm.
that whole band.
Interesting. Pratik, you kind of mentioned of something very interesting, right? Which is that the orders are coming from down south, right? Now you'd actually be surprised, right? I've had at least multiple conversations with founders of e-commerce companies or brands, right? Some of them are doing some work offline as well, right? And it's surprising to see this as a common constant across each conversation, right? I think people are amazed, and especially when you're, up north, right? When you are as an organization based up north, right? Your tendency is that there's very visible consumption, right? But I think when you start looking at data, it kind of uh, almost bowls you over, right? That a large
Yeah,
part of that consumption is essentially happening from south, right? And you're absolutely right. I think that's possibly my senses and my understanding is that's possibly because of the education that is there in those markets, right? People tend to understand pieces faster. They
yeah,
don't necessarily need somebody to push them to buy into something, and they
correct.
can kind of
Yeah,
independently choose. Of course, it's more institutionalized in many ways, right? And I think that
yeah.
essentially means more disposable capital available. I think there are a lot of those factors which kind of
Yeah, and I think also I think also the brand. So I am myself from North, and but I feel in the North you've got also a lot of brand value that governs your decision making, right?
Right.
So I would wear or I would consume a certain product because, oh hey, this is the thing to do.
Right.
So it's just inherent in the culture that I've even personally I have been brought up.
Right.
So whereas I have a lot of friends who come from, I've studied myself in Maharashtra, so I have a lot of friends who come in from down south, and I remember seeing them from the very early days. For them, it was more about consuming or putting something on that's actually functional, right? It's
Right.
more functional and
Right.
less brand driven.
Right.
So which is I think what you said. So it's absolutely right. That's the reason I think southern part of India is more into functional consumption and not just running around the brand that's out there.
Super. Pratik, an important question, right? And it's more a strategic question, right? Packaged differently, right? And I would love you to answer that. Now, I think, when you're doing anything with beauty, right, or anything with wellness, and I'm actually sort of expanding the circle for you, right? Because, all of these two things kind of coexist, right?
Yeah.
And they're very close to each other in many ways, right? How important does trust become, right, in your line of communication when you're actually going out and talking to customers, right? Because like we discussed, right? There's a much smaller lot of people who's as motivated as, say, the mass market is,
Yeah.
uh, right? How important does it becomes to constantly, uh, you know, for you to embed trust in anything that you do, right? And primarily communication, because that essentially helps you drive that customer to your website and all that, right? What are some of the things that you've, for example, chosen to do from your early days, and how it's kind of shaped up to how you do it now? Would love to understand that.
Sure. So, yeah, so trust is definitely something that can help you build a key. So this is something that's I think for everybody out there, right? So if you don't have trust in any new company, any new enterprise in absolutely any sector, if you don't build it with that value, it's just not
Sure.
going to go anywhere else. And so that's the reason, right from the early days. One, we were very transparent with our consumers, right? So
Sure.
if a consumer, let's say, buys a product, comes
Mhm.
back to me and says, one, I'm giving him the comfort to come back to me and say, hey, I don't think so. Uh, this is working well or this is good enough.
Mhm.
And we've gone back to the consumer and said, okay, if you feel the product is not working for you, we can send you another one
Sure.
just for you to try it on.
Right.
And so with those small things, I think you start building that ethos that so even today, so like back in the day, Nana and me personally would take maybe 15-20 calls a day ourselves. Today we've built up to a level where we've got a team doing that. And
Right.
even today, if you call up the Vanity Wagon customer care, you would be treated well. And that
Sure.
system needs to exist. I feel a lot of large marketplaces, they
Uh-huh.
consider you as somebody who's having a transaction with the company.
Sure.
And I think when that starts happening, you as a consumer you feel left out. And I have personally felt it, right? So I've bought goods of other companies online, a lot of other online marketplaces, and I've
Sure.
realized that okay, I've bought something, it's broken. I have nobody to reach to. I have nowhere to go. And even if I go somewhere, there'll be a long process. I'll have to send a
Right.
picture. I'll have to talk. So it's just too cumbersome, right? And so that's one. So right from the beginning, we say, okay, consumer is going to be the focus. We're going to talk to them. We're going to actually understand what they want and work around that. Secondly, we developed a system wherein we started working with a lot of these ambitious entrepreneurial women who also come part of our affiliate network. And all these women, so we the number is fairly high today, about 600 of them. Uh,
Right.
they are actual consumers. So what happens is when we talk to them, they help us understand. Okay, this is wrong. This is right. Maybe you guys are. Why don't you get this brand? Why don't you do this? And
Interesting.
we absorb all that information, and whatever works best for us and for our consumers, we come up with those policies.
Sure.
So one, we are actually talking to consumers. Two, we've got these women who are helping us understand the market better,
Right.
and uh, and I think that's how Misho built, right? So Misho is a great example of having done that.
Right.
So we've got a mix of these few things happening there, and rest, I think, like I said, our supply chain is transparent. We try
Right.
and transact directly with the brands, which our consumers today know because of the information we've given out there.
Right.
Hence, we don't get those queries that this looks fake or this is fake because it just can't be. It
Right.
comes directly from the brand, right? Yeah.
Interesting. Pratik, I mean, it's heartening to see, how founders put in that effort, right, while they're actually building the organizations, right? And I think it's just so difficult and painful. As you grow beyond a point, right? As you grow beyond a point, it just becomes so difficult for a founder to go down that level, do all of these things, right? Institutionalizing it becomes, it brings in that, like I said, right, the coldness, right?
Yeah.
Which is where brands start to uh, not brands, so platforms and brands start to sort of, it becomes difficult for them to navigate forward, right? I think that association kind of dries up in the process.
Right.
But I'm gonna save that one for our next conversation, right? I think what I want to talk to you about is COVID, right? And I think that's something. It's almost becoming cliched, right? Because I'm sure you have answered in many forums. I have been asking this question to, I think, every founder and every professional who's been on this platform. Uh, COVID has been an unreal event, right? But it's brought in a change which is perpetual
Yeah.
in many ways, right? I mean, we might, as an economy, and we have a tendency to go back to our old ways of doing things. But I think this one is here to stay, right? I think this shift has not just happened for, say, you and me, which is a certain age bracket. I think this is a shift which has happened for pretty much everybody, right?
Right.
Including parents, elderly, right? All of it. It's exposed us to a different way. It's transformed market in a very different way, right? How do you read this? Especially in an environment where, for example, the arbitrage that used to exist, right? Not that you experience that arbitrage because you've been largely a digital company, which essentially meant you could kind of ship products wherever it was required.
Right.
But it brought in an awareness and information arbitrage to as little as possible, right? I mean, people are consuming same kind of content in a tier A city and in a tier 2 city and a tier 3 city and even down further down, right? Uh, the aspiration is kind of zoomed, right? We
Yeah.
couldn't have anticipated and expected this kind of consumption boom to ever happen, right? I mean,
Right.
unfortunately, there are certain macroeconomic problems, but I'll keep that aside for now. What's been your experience, right, of COVID? How has it challenged you, and or kind of led you to change your plans, right? Because this is possibly not what you were calibrated for. This is something which has happened much earlier in the life cycle of
Yeah.
Vanity Wagon, right? Than you'd
Yeah.
anticipate, right? How has this changed it for you?
Right. So a lot going on there, right? So COVID is definitely something that's so one when we started off in 2018.
Mhm.
Initially we were having a lot of self doubts as well at times, right? So when you start up, it's not no, it's not for everybody. I'm sure
Right,
there are companies who've scaled up fairly quickly in let's say a year time, but
right,
e-commerce markets take time to build, and
right,
that's why you see Flipkart spending 10-12 years
right,
before they reach somewhere, and similarly a lot of other companies. So we were at that stage, and
mhm,
then came COVID. uh,
right,
Now it was an opportunity for us,
uh-huh,
one, to do things better. So I still remember the time the lockdown started. We were running our website on a WordPress engine, right? And WordPress was uh,
right,
it's it's a fabulous company out there, but it just wasn't working for us.
right,
And we felt there was a time lag on certain orders, certain
right,
shipments wouldn't go through online, and could be a problem at our end as well. But it's just how it was. And we took those 2 months and built a new website. Everybody was sitting at their respective homes and building
right,
that, of course. So that first wave was fairly less cumbersome than the last
right,
one. So most people in the company were away from COVID in terms of they weren't affected,
sure,
or family issues weren't that severe. So
right,
we worked on that process. We built
uh-huh,
something solid, and immediately once the lockdown was lifted, we saw a boom in our orders because
right,
everybody started enjoying the whole experience of the website. And
right,
these are very small things that go a very long way.
sure,
Uh, I was once asked a question, why would you pay 20, 10 lakh rupees to build a website when you can do it for 25,000? Uh, but
right,
it just the expertise, the intelligence. So this is one part. Now, what I'm saying is entirety. What COVID has
right,
done is you're absolutely right. It's opened uh, the internet to the remotest of sections of society,
right,
and with that happening, consumption has of course gone up. Uh,
right,
so that's of course beneficial for companies like us because we are an online
sure,
marketplace, only online right now. And when you are something like that, this an event like this would completely transform your business. And
sure,
so that was 2019. Flip 2021, we're seeing 3.5 lakh upwards of visitors every month on the website. So you've got that number kicking in
right,
because people are still afraid to step out. So
Sure.
today morning, in fact, I was seeing the news, coming couple of guidelines coming around Omicron and stuff like that. So I said,
Right.
so it's created that continuous fear, right? So every time I would step out, I'm going to be
Yeah.
like, oh, this is difficult, and
Right.
and and that's the reason why all this needs to, uh, why suddenly e-commerce markets, e-commerce companies are building up.
Sure. Interesting. Pratik, I think, the automatic question, right? When we talk of, of COVID, right? Bharat has become so much more savvier, right? I think every founder that you talk to, right? And I'm sure,
Yeah,
you possibly, have a strategy around it, or you kind of devising a strategy. I'm
yeah,
sure these are questions that you're answering internally, externally. But Bharat has become just so much more important for, I think, all e-commerce companies. And like I said, right, the aspiration is going through the roof because the information arbitrage that existed in markets is kind of now kind of going away, right?
correct.
To a very, very large extent, right? What's happening on the Bharat front, right? I mean, is that something that you are geared towards? Is that part of your strategy uh, going forward, or what's going to be your strategy on that front, right? How are you looking to tackle that, right? Because that's a lot of pent up demand, right? That's I mean, urban areas you have multiple options. Those areas have very limited options, right? So for a player like yourself, and this is something which is this is something that I've kind of across a bunch of conversations, right? What I've experienced is that founders of e-commerce companies or D2C brands, right? While they continue to do what they're doing in an urban market or for an urban market setting,
Yeah,
right? When they're acquiring
yeah,
customers, they have a completely different team which has been set up to tackle Bharat, right? Because like I said, the demand and the aggression with which people want to consume and try new things is absolutely phenomenal. I think TikTok is kind of, while it was casual,
yeah,
I think it's brought in a very different kind of an aspiration, right, and a
yeah,
manifestation of that,
yeah.
right? So what's happening on the Bharat front?
Absolutely. And so you're absolutely right, right? So even we, for us also, existence in a tier one or a tier two is something that comes naturally, right? So because
Sure.
that's just how the brand is. And
Right.
so we started off, and we knew immediately that this is the market because one, knowledge is easy, two,
Sure.
consumers are self-aware, and this
Right.
is the market that is going to buy our product. But then exactly what you said, 2020, when the whole pandemic and everything started, we, in fact, so our orders are fairly high from the northeast, and I'm talking about the remotest of areas. Uh,
Right.
Same ways, even south. When I say, it does not mean a Chennai or a Bangalore only. It also means the deepest of cities. We've even delivered a lot of orders to village POs, right? and
Right.
and you would
Interesting.
be so surprised, like why would a village post box or a post office have so many orders? And the
Right.
reason is, in those regions, so one thing you rightly mentioned, with the internet shift, TikTok and a lot of these companies coming up and giving out those guys reach, uh, another thing that happened is that community talks to each other, right? So
Right.
us living in an urban sort of a society, we don't necessarily talk to everybody around us. But
Sure.
in that community, conversation is the only way of living. And
Right.
because of which, if a brand genuinely works well on a certain area,
Sure.
that entire region will start supporting you because
Mhm.
that's just how they are.
Right.
And so our efforts on those lines are right now focused on that. So we have certain
Interesting.
target regions that we're working on. And when I say working on, I'm not saying, okay, I'm only going to sell to them. I'm also
Sure.
saying I'm going to empower those women to an extent that, okay, if somebody shops with a code that that lady has, I'm going to
Right.
give her a commission for it.
Interesting.
So that's the model we are building. We've reached a certain stage with a few of those regions.
Sure.
Hopefully that will materialize, and I can talk more about it next
Interesting.
time.
I think we're gonna save that one also for our next conversation, right? But I think O2O is very, very important. Experiential is very important, right? When you talk of beauty, you walk into these malls, there are these small kiosks that are out there, right? Which are there and which make you try, right? So the idea is that everybody's kind of taking it a step ahead, right, and a step forward where they want experiential. People want to these brands want to ensure that people experience it, right? And that possibly impacts the conversion and further association, right? And it also it becomes a good system for them to kind of collect an on ground feedback, right, which is not necessarily uh, possible in an online format. I mean, the just the sequence of activities becomes just too much more
Yeah.
longer, right, in many ways. uh, what are the thoughts on that, right? I mean, are we going to see an OTO sort of a strategy? Are we going to see a physical strategy? getting adopted in as you go along? What's the scene on that front?
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned this. So in fact, we were having this chat a couple of days back internally, and we are working on a model wherein I don't want to lose my root. So my root
Sure.
is the digital network, and why I don't want to lose it is because uh, it's not because I'm personally inclined to it, but so it's more of a business decision, right? It helps us expand faster. So let's assume you've got a store, and let's assume I've got an e-commerce market. Now, for both of us to get brands and products, I can
Right.
do it fairly quickly. For you, it'll have to be one, inventory, two, branding, three, you'll have to get a
Sure.
salesperson, uh, and a lot of that. So we are working on a model wherein our offline store would look a lot like an online store,
Right.
uh, wherein you would, but the only difference being like what you said, you'll have the touch and feel. You can actually try the product, but the shopping would still happen online. So that's something that we're working on. And I'm not necessarily saying we're going to do that in the next 2 months or 3 months. It also depends on the economy runs out from here, how the
Right.
next few months pan out, if things look stable. And once we know all those numbers stack up, then definitely you'll see us out there. Hopefully we'll have you in one of our stores.
I would love to be there, and I'm sure my wife and a bunch of people who work with us would be more than excited to be there, Prateek.
Sure.
Prateek, towards the end of a conversation, right? Last bunch of questions. What has Nika done to your aspiration, right? Or to you, right? As a founder group, right? Between you and Anna, right? What has it done to you guys, right? Has it made life easy in the sense that now people have started to believe that there's a model that can be built, can eventually go and get listed? What's it done to you, right? Has it made your job with investors easy, right, and other stakeholders easy? That listen, this is an exciting market to be in, right? Or has it put more pressure, saying that listen, now you have to increase your catalog, you're competing in a more mature market, there's an organized player. What's happening?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both, right? So I remember initially when the IPO was just getting listed, I got a couple of calls from public investors who wanted to have a
Right.
chat about the industry, and I said, "Hey, listen, uh, Nika is a fairly old and a stable company.
Right.
I am absolutely nobody to talk about stability of that company, and I'm fairly young in this journey, right? So Nena and me personally look up to the whole journey that
Sure.
Nika had,
Right.
and from an investor point of view, there are pros and cons. So the pros being, yes, a lot of investors today understand that e-commerce has a future. Uh, Two, they understand that beauty e-commerce has a future, and when that happens, it makes our job slightly easier. At least the first question of why you exist sort of goes behind.
Right.
From a con point of view, you're right. The market is suddenly it's going to see a lot of investment across marketing, across brand building,
Right.
because Nika has those reserves, right?
Sure.
And once that is happening, we have to make sure we are doing what we can, the most the best way we can do it, and that's what we're working on, right? So thankfully, we're not competing in the same segment. I'm sure a lot of other founders are
Right.
having shaky legs at the moment, but we're not one of them.
A fun question, Prateek. Did you subscribe to the IPO or not?
I did, in fact, twice. So, but
Nice.
unfortunately, got neither.
No, I think now it's listed. I think you can go on to buy in the exchange. Prateek, what are the next 2 years like, right? Cultivating new brands, right? Bringing in global brands into India. You're uniquely positioned, right? As a company, right? I think you're building a very thick community of people. I think which a lot of large institutionalized players cannot go out and do, right?
Right.
And I think that's an advantage that you're doing. There's a mix in the model that you've had, right? You're bringing in
Sure.
affiliates to come in and empower your sales, right? Do a lot of that navigation for you at the last mile, which is very interesting. In many ways, right? Um, what are the next 2 years like, right? On the
Yeah.
brand front specifically, right? Cultivating new brands, bringing in international brands. What's going to be next 2 years like?
Sure. So, in fact, we're working on both. So, something interesting that's happening in the market today is the acquisition model, right? So every day you'll
Right.
open your news, you'll see one brand got acquired, another brand got acquired. So,
Right.
so right now it's more like shopping. So everybody has their baskets and they're just picking up brands and filling up their basket. Uh, So we're not doing it that way because, of course,
Sure.
we don't wish to spend all our reserves on brand acquisition.
Right.
Two, we want to make it more strategic. So what we are
Sure.
doing now is building private labels, parallelly joining hands with a lot of brands who need help in terms of data, in terms of team
Sure.
support,
Inside.
marketing, and we can give them all of that. In
Right.
return, we'll say, okay, so let's do a deal that's mutually beneficial, and
Sure.
we'll pick up a part of your company, and we'll help you build it to a level where you and me both are happy when we walk away.
Right.
So
Sure.
so that is something we're doing. We're also building our own brand, which is going to launch in the month of January. So I'll send you products to try. Hopefully you like them. So
Right.
that's happening in Jan. And besides this, the next 2 years for us is also a lot about working with the international market. So we're
Right.
bringing in a lot of international brands.
Mhm.
We are trying to get our brands out there. So a lot of Indian brands. We've started a shop in Singapore. We ship from India at the moment.
Mhm.
But we also look to set up a more uh, inter-country related sort of business wherein we have
Right.
an entire shop or warehousing in Singapore or Dubai. So that's
Uh-huh.
also in pipeline. So 2 years you would see us one solidifying India and two also
Interesting.
being there internationally.
Fantastic. Prateek, last question in this conversation, right? I mean, how I want these conversations to go on, right? It's almost becoming cliched. I can't even tell you, right? But Prateek, what are the next? I mean, you answered what are the next 2 years like, right? And I'm sure it's going to be very very interesting time, right? As you go along, I think India is, I think we're a very very exciting phase, right? I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better phase, and I think that's not just India, but I think Indians globally, and I think we are able to pass on that excitement, enthusiasm, and exuberance to a lot of other smaller markets, right? For example, Singapore, like markets, right?
Yeah.
And I think and I think we're getting the kind of recognition which is required, right? I think that trust is now coming in, that in this superiority with which we can kind of deliver. Pradeep, my last question, right, and it's more personal. No journey is an easy journey, right? I think always one founder always has something to, give to another one, right? And more often than not, it's advice, right? And I'm sure you've done this on many occasions, right? But I would love to capture it here. What are some of those, say, advisors, hacks that you could figure out in your journey, right? Because entrepreneurship is something which is not about just doing one plus two plus and so on and so forth, right? It's a
Yeah.
lot about understanding yourself, right? There are facets that you didn't know of that you could pull off beautifully, right? It's a lot about understanding yourself, right?
True.
Connecting with yourself at a deeper level, so on and so forth, right? What are some of those advisors inputs that you want to give away, right? Hacks that you've possibly implemented in the process which has helped you to get to the point that you are at, right? I'd love you to spell some of them out here in this conversation.
Sure. Sure. So I think one hack that I've come to realize over the last 2 years, and I of course adopt myself, is nobody else can do your job, right? So when I say so, entrepreneurship is not a small journey. It's not a 2 year journey. Okay, so I'm going to build a company in 2 years. I get funding,
Right.
perfect. I'm going to enjoy my life. I let others do their job. It can't work like that, and that's now
Right.
how you not how you will build a sustainable business.
Right.
So to every entrepreneur out there, I feel this is one piece of learning that I've got in all humbleness, that you have to do your job and you can't expect somebody else to take over
Right.
and just sit back and relax. So you have to be part of the whole process. I was at an event a couple of days back, picking up cartons, setting up shelves, and I'm not saying I do it because I want to boast about it. I do
Right.
it because I know I can do it better than maybe somebody else,
Right.
and that's why I
Right.
do it. So you have to always be out there. So that's one of them. And I
Mhm.
think the second piece that I would want to say is that do everything with your honesty, right? So if you're honest to your business, honest to your consumers, if you're
Right.
honest to your team, and if you have a problem, I so many times walk up to my co-founders and I say, hey, I'm really puzzled with this issue and I really can't get out of it,
Right.
and they would help me out. But if I just keep it to myself and say I'm going to look like the high guy, I'm the CEO of the company,
Right.
I'm going to wear a suit and sit in the corner and enjoy my coffee, that then you're never going to get out of your troubles.
Right.
So I think these two things are really something that I live by, and hopefully they help everybody else.
Interesting. Pratik, thank you so much for doing this, right? I mean, I think I kind of agree with all of what you've said, right? In the last, the couple of points that you highlighted. I think honesty is very, very important. I think acceptance is very important. Honesty is very
Yeah.
important. And I think you have to be in it, right? Because, on a lot of occasions, people don't necessarily, especially the teams that you're working with, right, don't necessarily understand the zone that you're coming from, right? I think that
Sure.
inside intelligence that a founder has, I think it just helps people navigate better. Thus, I think it just becomes important to be involved, right? But I think it's also important to empower. I think a lot of
True.
people are not necessarily able to maintain that balance, right? They tend to get into a lot of things, which creates disharmony, right? In many ways, but I think kind of completely agree with all the points that you highlighted, Prateek. Listen, this was an absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. Loved every bit of it. Thank you for kind of taking us through your journey, right? And I'm sure it's not been easy, but I think you've done it with a smile. And my sense is the community that you've built is smiling for the sincerity and effort that you put into get great products out there, which is just so much more important in today's time, right? When you especially flabbergasted, overwhelmed with all the information that is out there, right? I think it becomes important to have a player which can just go out and communicate to the point, be transparent with a lot of trust, honesty, integrity, and help people decide better. I think that in today's time is a very, very critical construct for any business to build that long-term relationship. And I think you're doing it beautifully, Prateek. Thank you so much for doing this. Loved having you for this session, and I look forward to having you much sooner. There's a lot of interesting stuff that you are at, and I'd use those occasions to discuss about all of that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Ashu, and I'm really glad we did this today. And yeah, I've absolutely loved answering those questions, and it has made me think a little more. So I think when you answer questions, you also start thinking, right? So
It
that
does.
that helps to keep the brain keep it sharp. So I'm fairly glad we did this, and yeah, looking forward. Hopefully, sometime soon we'll do this again.
Thanks, Prateek. Bye. Take care.
Thanks, Ashu. Take care.